My apologies. So with that, we're going to set it up that we have a terrifically droll session, as you could tell. I just gave it away. I'm Caressa Douglas, and I'm from a company called BEN, the Branded Entertainment Network, and we're a global company of integration experts. We work across verticals, so film, TV, digital, influencer, social, and music video. And obviously we believe in this so much, which is why we're here. And with that, why don't we give a quick look of what we do, set it all up.
Found this house on Zillow.
Welcome to Baskin Robbins.
So there we go. A bit of audience participation before I continue. How many producers do we have in the room? Terrific. Creators in the digital space? Fantastic. Any brands in the room? All right, so we can really be honest out here. We sure can. We got
any agencies?
No, how about that? Agencies? Did I miss anyone? All right. Well, super. We can be really honest from a producer perspective, and that's the reason why we're here. My goal is to send you off with really useful information that you can apply to your projects, and hopefully you can envision your projects having brand support, and our guests here will also give you some advice and tips that they've learned along the way. So with that, we also have two producers with us by origin who've also crossed over and are leaders in this space, global leaders. So you may recognize Samantha Glynn, who's next to me right here, and she's the VP of Branded Integration from Fremantle. And then alongside her is David Eilenberg, who is the Chief Creative Officer for ITV America. You have a little show that has a lot of representation here this time, so we may touch on that.
Okay, sounds good.
If you're not all bored with the Love Island. Yeah. So anyway. But with that, Samantha, before we go into what you do, how about we show some of your work also to illustrate your background?
I can't stop nothing I can see but you when you dance, dance, dance. Feel good creeping up on you, so just dance, dance, dance. Come on, all those things I shouldn't do, but you dance, dance, dance. And ain't nobody leaving soon, so keep dancing. I can't stop got this feeling in my body. Break it down. Got this feeling in my body. Can't stop the feeling. Got this feeling in my body.
It's missing. I think you should get that mic from company to do some sponsorship.
That's by the end of this session.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes,
perfect.
okay.
It's like full insert all the time on them. So there we go. So how about we start with the beginning? Was there a project in the beginning? Was there a project that you recognized was really terrific for brands, or you had that moment where a brand should participate in this? And what was that first time like?
Well, so for me personally, the first experience was with the first several seasons of The Apprentice in the US. And I think that was, at least in our territory, the first time the product placement, narrative model, and business model really intertwined on broadcast. I can't think of one before that, maybe Survivor in some ways. But yeah, that was my education in the integration space. And I think actually our two organizations work together on that to some extent. Yeah,
absolutely. For the record, the lead actor of that show is also off limits. We can't ask any questions about that. You could tell by my accent. And how about you, Samantha?
Well, how did I lose my branded entertainment virginity?
I love her.
We just met, best friends. I got approached by Audi in 2005, before YouTube existed, and they said, we would like our own TV channel on Sky TV in the UK, and it's going to run 24/7, and it's all going to be about Audis. And I'm like, bring it on. So that was a fascinating plunge into the world of branded entertainment, because it was incessant broadcast with a lot of creative scheduling that worked as a Lena TV channel. And in a way, I think we kind of went backwards a bit after that, and it was a real struggle to get advertiser-funded programming off the ground. Then compliance laws changed in Europe. It's been a slow dribble of producers, networks, and brands seeing that it's okay to really push those boundaries and put brands into content in, I liked your real bold and authentic way. And those are really key words for me, being bold and making the brand feel completely authentic with the content.
Well, that actually leads into a question I had about your guiding principles when you approach programs. What's really paramount that you remind both the producing side and the brand side to keep in mind as you go into a partnership? Is there something, I mean?
Well, producers, remember, commercial is not a dirty word. You're on commercial broadcasters, you've got advertisers funding your content. So putting the content in a respectful and authentic way is not a bad thing. It helps fund your programs. So that's a really important step to get beyond, because we haven't grown up with that tradition in the UK. So that's my first point.
Right. Well, David, I kind of want to touch, I'm going to answer it not really for you. I'm so super sorry.
Okay.
But Queer Eye, for example, you have the Fab Five. You also, as some of us we know, have very creative producers who have a lot to say. What's that guiding principle like when you approach balancing what they really want to do and help tell their story with the brands who want to partner?
I mean, I think Queer Eye is indicative of something just from a principle standpoint that does help in this conversation, which is we live in a world of brands, and so if you're going to reflect reality, that's part of the reality we all inhabit. So it's actually very difficult to produce a version of Queer Eye in which brands don't exist. I don't actually even know how you would do that, because you need to be able to make recommendations and recognize that there are certain things at certain price points that may help your subject. So I think that level of sort of authentic reflection of the real world is something that works for branded content when it's at its best, because it's just content.
No, I think that's a really good point. The reason that we're out here is we see so much opportunity in this territory. We've been around for 3 decades, and we've been in London for 12, 14 years. But we see this opportunity because the compliance changes to highlight the opportunities versus the stigma and make it more positive. Because again, as we talk about brands, if a brand was to pull up and the badge of that car is covered with a piece of tape, is that more disruptive? Show of hands? Yeah, it really brings you out of the experience. So I agree with what you're saying right there. We're talking here, we're trying to focus on streaming because we do believe that streaming, unifies viewers globally. When you're developing your shows, do you take that into consideration, the global audience, knowing that some of your linear TV projects may be exported globally?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why I chose to show a clip from Love Island, beyond the fact that you just can't get enough Love Island, is you would think to yourself, well, Love Island is not a streaming show, and yet in some ways it actually is, because the UK episodes of Love Island are currently playing on Hulu in the US, and one of the things that you generally have to prepare for now is that your show, no matter where it starts, may end up on a streamer. It's becoming more and more likely, and that's both a big opportunity for brands, but also something to help them plan for.
But it's an added bonus generally, isn't it? Because there's no guarantees where it's going to end up.
Right.
So they'll just pay for that first country integration,
right,
and then hopefully...
Yeah, it's an added bonus, but it's also, I mean, I'd almost be curious to know from your perspective. So when we launched Queer Eye, it launched in 100+ countries at once, because that's what happens when you launch on Netflix. And so, are those big sponsors prepared to spike in places they may not even be expecting? It's not a sort of old school global rollout where you get to plan for each territory. It's the whole world.
But from your point of view, do you find that brands are global, and do they think globally, or do they just think territory by territory?
Well, for us, because we've been doing this a long time, thanks for asking me a question, by the way. But for us, a lot of our brands, they're always looking ahead. It's like, what's next? What can we do next? A lot of our brands were really quick to adopt streaming, working in House of Cards, for example, in that very first one. So to them, they do understand the global appeal, and it's a benefit to have clients like Microsoft or General Motors, who are global companies. But you actually had a terrific example of that you shared about an anecdote.
Well, this is anecdotal. I remember being told, this is years ago, so it happens even more quickly now, that there was a series of viral Old Spice commercials, and I met the Old Spice guy, if you remember him. And he told me that the commercials had gone so viral as content in a territory that Old Spice was not in, that it ended up propelling the launch of the brand in a territory where it didn't exist, which I thought was really interesting, because it's sort of like content now serves as marketing in such unexpected ways. You can't predict all of it, either as a producer or as a brand, but I think you do have to be prepared for a much more complicated and I think mostly exciting matrix of possibilities.
Right. Absolutely. And one more note, actually, we do have a data point to back up the answer about global appeal. We did an independent study with Ipsos about a year and a half ago, and of the Fortune 500 CMO levels, 86% felt, and this is again a year and a half ago, 86% felt that their audience was migrating to a streaming platform, and that they needed to be there. And you know, so many brands, and I would love to hear from you guys, from maybe the linear network position to some of the streaming shows you work on. Have you seen an increase of demand from brands in the last few years because of streaming, possibly?
I think streaming's part of it, but I also think it's brands are recognising the value of being inside content, and they understand that that brings an emotional impact that a 30-second spot can never give them. And to be associated with a character going through great happiness or great sadness is so powerful to the audiences, and especially when those audiences are fans. So, you know, you saw our reel with Got Talent and X Factor. Those shows change people's lives, and they're very... So many brands are in that space as well. They're all about culture change, about transforming their customers' experiences. So marrying the two has suddenly become a valuable proposition for brands. So it's not, as you know, product placement is no longer just about a cup on a desk. It's about a whole story around that brand in the show. And then that brand takes that story and amplifies it on their social media, off-air, on-pack, promotion. So it becomes this very holistic experience for the brand and the consumer together, and the content is the driver.
Right. David, do you have any?
I mean, I agree with all of that. The other peculiar thing about the current moment is that everyone's a streamer. We can all stream from this room on our phones, and the brands themselves can stream, and I think you're going to see quite a lot more experimentation with that. That said, I think that entertainment networks, be they linear or streaming, still have a really impactful role as curators, and that there's a level of trust that the audience have in them that make it very appealing for brands to want to be on those platforms. So I don't think that's going to end anytime soon.
Interesting point about trust, because we all use that a lot. I'm going to ask a negative, not a negative, possible negative experience. Was there a time along the way in your career that something, either you had to say no to a client because it was just too much, or maybe there was feedback socially from an outcome of an integration or a program that was a little bit of backlash? Have you had that? I know I didn't really prep you for this one. I don't think.
I think we've all had terrible briefs that have come in that are so inappropriate for the show. And when it's, you know, the incongruity is enormous, and at that point you just have to go back to the client and go, this is never going to work. And they go, here's my money, and you go, no, this is never going to work. Because we all...
And then you're like, okay, no.
We've also got our internal brand police. We have to keep the brands of our shows really intact, and it's important not to muddy the waters and bring in things that are inappropriate. So it's back to that authentic thing.
No, I think that's an absolutely critical point, which is that if you sell out the brand of your show on the behalf of a subsidiary brand that doesn't make sense, you're serving neither. And actually, if you look at the suite of Love Island brands that our UK colleagues have put into the show, they all make sense tonally for the show, and that's really where you get into trouble if you're just trying to wedge something in because of the enthusiasm. I think you have to be mindful of your show's brand first.
Well, and what you're reflecting, I think, is a trend across all verticals, is the support of producer-driven, story-driven entertainment. You know, we hear that more often, that whether it's streaming services or network, that they're pulling back on forcing storytellers to do something they don't want to do, because I think they've experienced the negative outcome. Can you want to talk about one of your examples that was just so fun and terrific and great outcome on the bouncing back from the negative one?
I mean, if we can share an example from our mutual past, and this is way back in the day, only as sort of indicative of how organic it can be at its best. There was a very early episode of The Apprentice where the contestants were tasked with making ice cream flavors, and one team chose to make, just in the field, not prompted by anything, an ice cream with Dunkin' donuts as the core flavoring. So we actually had to call, I don't know if it was you, but you collectively, after this had happened and say, hey, the contestants chose to use your brand, can we please include the content in the show? And that's sort of the dream scenario, because it's actually just happening in the game, and yet it sort of serves everybody.
Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't pay much on that.
We had no choice but to accept whatever it was you offered.
Yeah.
Well, another of your brands. So you saw it in the...
I really didn't set them up this way, I should so promise.
Microsoft, and it was Skype, and it was a couple of years ago, and they came to us for the X Factor in the UK, and they said, can we use Skype for the contestants to talk to their families and to get news from the judges and use it as the communication tool with the outside world? And that was so organic to the show, because we couldn't have done it without a Skype or equivalent. So for them to pay us for it, added bonus. And again, we talk about those big emotions, and you see the contestants hearing they're going to Barbados for the judges' houses, and they're so excited. Or you see that moment when they're a little bit teary and they're talking to the whole family with the Skype. What's it when you've got two people on at once? Anyway, it's some function that they paid us to mention.
I'm getting
that one. Again, it was really fantastic. And what happened after the UK one was they came to us and said, can we do the same in India? So we did it in our India's Got Talent show, and then after that we did it some of our digital content. So, you know, when a brand and a production company become partners and they go on a little journey around the world and around the shows and across seasons, then I think that is super successful.
Okay, you stole my question, because I was going to lead into the power of long-term relationships. I can speak from the brand side, not having a brand person up here. We represent the brands, so we're agnostic with our solutions with partners on the content side. So, but with that, the benefit that we have seen with brands having a long-term and return relationship with storytellers is that both of you mutually understand the objectives better, and you feel connected better, so it's easier to tell the stories because you really know each other. And so, you know, I think it's great for the producers in the room to consider that it's not just a one-night stand for these brands, that they just want, you know, a one and done and that's it. They definitely value the long, and there's that trust.
Yeah, but it is polyamorous.
Right. Yeah, we like each other.
I mean, look how many brands you managed to get in Love Island, all authentically, but there were a lot of them. It's fantastic.
Sure. I mean, I think you just have to be mindful of people's categories and each of them having a specific place in the ecosystem that you're creating. But yeah, I think long-term relationships and also understanding, you know, if you have preferred network partners who their big relationships are with. So when I was on the network side at Turner, we did a series of concert specials with State Farm that really benefited from the fact that they were also a major advertiser and an NBA sponsor, and sort of were already sort of so tied into our ecosystem that it made the creative process that much easier. So yeah, I agree with that.
Talk about creative process. In 2017, and tying it back into this streaming conversation we're having, 92% of the top 25 streaming shows had brand integrations. And I wonder, as producers, and you've been on both sides, and you have projects in both verticals, is that maybe because it's more allowable or easier? What's your experience? Have you had that experience coming from the network side? Are you shackled more, or?
I mean, I think it would stand to reason that simply the economics of streamers, if they want advertiser money to come in, are going to be contingent on that, because they don't run 30s for the most part. Some of the digital platforms obviously have pre-roll and other forms of more traditional advertising, but it doesn't surprise me that it's trending that direction. I think that's almost a necessity if they want that as part of what it is they do.
But it's not something that the streaming networks are shouting about, which is interesting. It's kind of gone under the radar, and often I get our producers from around the world saying, but it's SVOD, can we put a brand in? And I'm like, yeah, but it's not yet a given. Yeah,
I mean, our experience has been, it's really like the Wild West, you know, and there are so many shows out there. You know, I think I mentioned there were 572 original TV shows last year, just in streaming and network television. So how do It's how do you get through all that clutter and connect with producers. So it is kind of a Wild West without an infrastructure. I think that's the problem. So right now, I think it's a case-by-case example.
Well, and the other thing is that sponsors are used to using ratings points as their primary form of, or at least indicator of ROI, and that is just not going to exist the same way, which is the other giant leap that they're going to have to take.
But there must be other data, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, you know, what's cool, we also, because it wasn't being released, and I don't know if I mentioned, we're a Bill Gates company on top of it, name drop, and so that was super obnoxious. But being that way, you know, data is really important to him and to us. And we actually, we started an independent study with a Silicon Valley firm about 2 years ago. But aside from just the viewer impressions, it's this behavior we're understanding. So for our brands that we represent, binge behavior actually will play a role in what they commit to when it comes to dollars or marketing support. You know, for Queer Eye, for example, 80% of the audience watches 3 or more in one sitting. So for a brand to think, I'm going to commit to that show, you're going to see our GMC truck in every episode, the recall is greater. So it's not just, I think brands are getting really smart that it's not just the viewer impressions, but it's the engagement. You know, that's the commodity is audience attention, right? Especially with this everywhere. Do you use, you know, data or social, you know, feedback from your audience when it comes to what you do? How does that play a role?
Well, we're just conducting a data survey at the moment, and we're looking actually at how data can improve our ratings by monitoring our social and digital feeds and what the comments and engagement are, and then plugging that back into the peaks in our shows, which has been fascinating. And then the next step will be to integrate brands into that and to bring brands' own data and marry it with our data. Right. And there, I think you've got some amazingly successful ROI models.
I mean, I think from our standpoint, you know, in the States, we're producers, we're not a network. And so in some ways, on a pure sort of metric standpoint, we're beholden to what the networks give us to work with. But when we can use social sentiment and crunch sort of what's happening online to impact the creative of the shows, we certainly will. And in fact, you know, Love Island thrives on that because it's shot sort of quick turn. We produced The Four for Fox, which is not our format, but we were the producers of it in the States. Similarly, there you're really reading social to understand how people are experiencing the show and then letting that inform your producing. And I think that that's going to be a big trend over time just in general. I mean, irrespective of the branded elements of it.
Okay, I'm seeing the sign. We have 5 minutes, and before we go into some questions, I have to not embarrass Samantha. We're fabulous, David and I, but we're not as fabulous as Samantha because she is actually an author in this space, and I think I'm pretty jealous that I wasn't able to participate at this. But you know, you've been so experienced in the space of brand entertainment. Do you have a few, without giving away everything in your book, and by the way, with the best question out there, someone can take this book home and she'll sign it. Just a couple, you know, do's for producers to consider when they're working with brands?
Well, I think the big do from this is the fact that the book got published at all. So there's an appetite for this kind of, look at this for product placement. She's very good at her job.
Yes.
The fact is, yeah, perfectly. So that's the fact it exists and the fact there's an appetite for brand entertainment. This came off the back of Cannes Lions, which, as most of you know, is an advertising festival, and they created an entertainment stream which took a couple of years to kind of gain momentum, but now it's a bona fide part of what advertising could be, and it's the marriage of people like us with the advertising industry. So this is a testament to the fact that we can all work together. And all the authors in this book come from different fields, from advertisers, from brands, from production companies. And the great thing for me is this is now on syllabuses at universities. And universities are starting to do branded entertainment modules as part of their marketing degrees. It might be that they start doing them as part of their television degrees as well. And, you know, the ultimate joke we had in the room, she does it again, she does it beautifully, is can you win a Cannes, which is a Cannes Lions and a Cannes Film Festival Award. So again, can we win a Cannes BAFTA, a Cannes Emmy? It doesn't sound as good, but you get the idea that if you can make something that is such great entertainment and happens to have a brand seamlessly integrated into it, then you're opening the doors to the future.
Fantastic. The name of the book is The Art of Branded Entertainment. And you can one-click it on Amazon or PayPal. So, okay, I know we're getting close. And there were some questions. So if we vote on it, someone's better claim these questions, whichever is the best. I already asked one of those. Is there a show in the UK that would be ripe for branded partnerships? Other than your own. Is there one that's missing? You're like, that's a big miss. They should be doing something.
Do you know what? I can't say a specific show. What I would love to see is some retro dramas with brands in. And you were talking about Winona Ryder, Stranger Things. Now, there were some really brave brands here and got into retro. Because my challenge is always, we've got a drama show and it's very rare it's set today in the UK. So finding a brand to go into it is difficult. But imagine if brands are brave enough to say, we were around in the 80s, off you go.
Right. How do you feel? You're American.
Good. I can't opine on what UK shows are right for branding. We should. Yes,
there you go.
I think that's,
You see them coming through.
Yeah.
How about? We've covered some of these. Are there any questions from this session? Fantastic, right in the front.
What do you see as the main difference between the advertising or brands in the US versus the UK? Is it far more transactional in the US? Is it a bit slower paced? Do brands expect different types of behaviour? We've got offices in New York and LA and London, and we're yet to really properly look at product placement in our channels and across our sphere. But there's something from what I've seen so far that suggests that brands in the UK are much more reluctant to just kind of get stuck in, do sponsorship in the way that US brands are.
Well, can I answer from a brand perspective?
Yeah, please.
So for us in the States, it is definitely not transactional. We work heavily with existing IP, so you have to respect and I think it's our success, is to respect the creative and the producer's position, and so therefore you can't just go in and say, I'm going to buy this scene and this is what it's going to be, and you're going to talk about the features and benefits, and this is what it's going to. It's definitely not transactional for us, but it's also vertical specific. You know, if we were doing rate card day part or evening shows, or influencers, which we work strongly in, you know, that can be considered transactional, but definitely for us. It's always about the creative first, as well as protecting the brand guidelines at the same time. So when those two are kept in mind, that triangle is completed with an audience that's really happy. So I'm sorry.
No, agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Someone went fast. Yes.
Hello there.
Hello.
Ali May. So you guys are from massive companies, and I assume having that legacy, having that catalog, having that amazing array of work and networks really helps. So say somebody is taking little baby producer steps. What are your specific advice for those kind of people? Just asking for a friend.
You both started out really humble beginnings.
Speak to your broadcaster. You know, you've got to work in partnership with their commercial teams to bring a brand on board, and it's very difficult to say. You know, some people think they can go and find a brand and then take it to the broadcaster and it's just going to happen immediately. I think it has to be a kind of three-way process between brand, broadcaster and production company.
I completely agree with that. The only other nuance I would give is if you find an emerging brand that can be the subject of a show, that's another way to do this space in a really interesting way. Yeah. So, you know, you look at the US and this is, you know, there was a big celebrity involved, but Wahlburgers was a standalone sort of vanity restaurant, and that show has helped propel it into a billion-dollar brand, and that's through smart brand management, really good content, and a distribution plan all marrying one another. And that's an instance where if you found that right business that you felt could scale into a brand, you can work with them first and then bring it to the broadcaster as a prospective show. I think that's the other way to get into it.
So our time has expired. However, in our true fun and boring selves, we have a cocktail party after this in a little bit of time. So you're welcome to try to find us. If you have additional questions or something we didn't cover, please have a drink with us and ask us your questions. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, David. And thank you guys for coming and listening to us.